This is the story of Martin Bormann, one of Adolf Hitler's most trusted confidants and the head of the Nazi Party Chancellery. Known as the Shadow Man for his behind-the-scenes manipulation and power, Bormann was one of the most influential figures in the Nazi regime. He was a master bureaucrat, responsible for overseeing much of the Nazi administration and Hitler's personal affairs. By the time of Hitler's death in the Führer bunker in 1945, Bormann had positioned himself at the center of Nazi power. But when Berlin fell to the Allies, Bormann seemingly vanished into thin air, leaving the world to wonder, did he die in the chaos of Berlin's fall, or did he manage to escape justice? In May 1945, as Soviet forces encircled Berlin, the Nazi regime crumbled. Hitler had committed suicide in his bunker, leaving his closest allies to fend for themselves. Bormann, along with other high-ranking Nazis, attempted to flee the city. For years, rumors swirled about Bormann's fate. Some claimed he was killed while trying to escape. Others believed he had successfully fled to South America, where many Nazis sought refuge. It wasn't until 1972, nearly 3 decades later, that his remains were reportedly discovered in Berlin. But even today, questions remain. Did Martin Bormann truly die in 1945, or was his death faked to cover his escape? The Nazi leadership wanted to survive, even in the face of their empire's collapse. Bormann, in particular, knew that if he was captured, he would be tried for war crimes. His crimes were numerous and horrific. He had overseen the administration of the final solution, the extermination of millions of Jews, and the slave labor that fueled Nazi war production. His escape from Berlin was driven by a desire to avoid accountability for these atrocities. But for those hunting Bormann, particularly the Allies, the goal was to bring him to justice. The discovery of his remains in 1972 seemed to close the book on Bormann's fate. But was it truly the end of the story? The chaos of Berlin's fall provided a perfect cover for high-ranking Nazis to disappear. As the city crumbled under Allied bombardment, millions of people were fleeing, hiding, or dying in the rubble. Bormann was reportedly last seen fleeing the Führer bunker with SS physician Ludwig Stumpfegger. Witnesses claimed he was killed by Soviet fire while attempting to escape, but no body was recovered at the time. This lack of a body made it easy for conspiracy theories to flourish. Then, in 1972, workers excavating a construction site in Berlin uncovered 2 skeletons. Forensic analysis confirmed that one set of remains belonged to Martin Bormann, supposedly ending the mystery. But even with this discovery, some historians and conspiracy theorists refused to believe that Bormann had died in 1945. They pointed to inconsistencies in the official story and the timing of the discovery, raising questions about whether the remains had been planted. Could Bormann have escaped, only to fake his death years later? Martin Bormann wasn't just a loyal Nazi. He was one of the masterminds behind some of the regime's most brutal policies. As Hitler's right-hand man, he played a key role in the administration of the Holocaust. He ensured that the trains ran on time, that the death camps were supplied with slave labor, and that the extermination of Jews, Romani people, and political dissidents was carried out with ruthless efficiency. He signed orders that led to the deaths of millions, all while maintaining a quiet, bureaucratic facade. Bormann was not a soldier or a general. He was a behind-the-scenes operator, pulling the levers of Nazi bureaucracy to ensure that the regime's genocidal goals were met. He controlled access to Hitler, making him one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany. His influence over Hitler was so strong that he often dictated Nazi policy without consulting others in the leadership. Bormann's power came not from charisma or military prowess, but from his cold, calculating nature. In the aftermath of the war, Bormann was convicted in absentia during the Nuremberg trials. He was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity and sentenced to death. But with Bormann missing, the sentence could not be carried out. For decades, the mystery of his disappearance lingered. Many believed that Bormann had fled to South America, where other Nazis, like Adolf Eichmann and Josef Mengele, had found refuge. The discovery of Bormann's remains in 1972 should have put an end to the speculation. Forensic analysis showed that the skeleton found in Berlin matched Bormann's dental records. But even with this evidence, doubts persisted. Some questioned the timing of the discovery, noting that it came at a moment when West Germany was eager to close the book on its Nazi past. Others pointed to eyewitness accounts that contradicted the official narrative, suggesting that Bormann had been spotted in Argentina or Brazil long after the war ended. The remains themselves also raised questions. There were traces of cyanide in Bormann's bones, suggesting that he had committed suicide rather than being killed by Soviet fire. But why would a high-ranking Nazi official with access to escape routes choose to kill himself in Berlin rather than flee? And why had his body remained undiscovered for nearly 30 years? The excavation of Martin Bormann's remains in 1972 seemed to solve the mystery of his death, but it also left room for doubt. While forensic evidence confirmed that the remains were Bormann's, some historians still question the official narrative. Could Bormann have faked his death, using a body double to mislead investigators, or was the discovery of his remains simply a delayed resolution to one of the most notorious disappearances in history? In the years following the discovery, several investigations have revisited the case, examining both the remains and the circumstances of Bormann's disappearance. While most experts now agree that Bormann died in 1945, the persistence of conspiracy theories suggests that his shadow still looms large over the history of the Third Reich. The idea that one of Hitler's most loyal henchmen could have escaped justice, living out his days in relative peace while millions of his victims lay in unmarked graves, is a powerful and controversial narrative. The discovery of Martin Bormann's remains may have answered the question of his death, but it did little to satisfy those who believed he had escaped. The fact that his body lay undiscovered for nearly 30 years, combined with the reports of sightings in South America, fueled speculation that Bormann had lived out his life in exile. The remains, discovered in a nondescript Berlin construction site, provided closure for some, but left others unsatisfied. In a sense, the controversy surrounding Bormann's death mirrors the broader debates about Nazi accountability. While many of the regime's leaders were captured and tried, others, like Mengele, evaded justice entirely. The discovery of Bormann's remains may have closed one chapter of Nazi history, but it opened up new questions about the fate of other war criminals and the lengths they would go to in order to avoid punishment. Martin Bormann's crimes were not as visible as those of the SS guards at concentration camps or the Einsatzgruppen death squads. His weapon was paperwork, but the consequences were just as deadly. As Hitler's personal secretary and head of the Nazi Party Chancellery, Bormann had his hands in nearly every aspect of the regime's genocidal policies. He oversaw the exploitation of millions of slave laborers, ensuring that factories were supplied with workers, even as conditions led to mass deaths from overwork, starvation, and disease. Perhaps most infamously, Bormann was one of the key administrators behind the Holocaust. He ensured that the extermination camps were supplied with the resources they needed to carry out the mass murder of Jews, Romani people, and other groups targeted by the Nazis. He signed off on the orders for deportations, knowing full well that these transports were sending people to their deaths. In addition to his administrative role in the Holocaust, Bormann was a fierce anti-Semite, advocating for the complete extermination of Jews from Europe. He once remarked that the Jewish question will only be solved when the last Jew has left Europe. His cruelty was not just bureaucratic, it was ideological. Martin Bormann's life and death remain one of the most controversial chapters in the history of Nazi Germany. As one of Hitler's closest aides, he was responsible for some of the regime's most horrific crimes, yet he managed to evade capture for decades. The discovery of his remains in 1972 seemingly put an end to the mystery, but for many, the question remains: did Bormann truly die in 1945, or did he escape justice? The excavation of his burial site may have provided closure for some, but it also opened the door to new questions and conspiracy theories. Even today, Bormann's story serves as a reminder of the depths of Nazi cruelty and the enduring mysteries of World War II.